For more on this, we are joined now by Maximo Torero, the UN Food and Agriculture Organization's chief economist. Appreciate you joining us.
A pleasure to join you today.
So President Trump announced that the leaders of Israel and Lebanon will hold direct talks today, and he's also indicating a peace deal could come within days to end the war with Iran. But if that doesn't happen, your organization is warning that a global food crisis could develop if normal traffic through the Strait of Hormuz does not resume soon. So how bad is it now, and how much worse could this get?
Exactly. So what we are arguing is that the clock is ticking because the clock is related to the crop calendar of countries. So right now we have a set of countries which are already in the planting season, like Bangladesh, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, India, Sudan, Kenya, for example, in the case of Africa, and Brazil in the case of South America and Thailand. So if we continue the non-movement of shipments through this Strait of Hormuz, which brings 35% of the oil, 20% of the natural gas, and 20 to 30% of fertilizers, and 50% of sulfur, which is used also to produce phosphate, then we, of course, farmers will be making decisions of planting with less inputs. That will affect yields, and that will affect availability of food, which today we have food. That's why the FAO Food Price Index didn't show a significant increase, only in oilseeds and sugar. But for the second half of the year and the next year, there is where the challenge will happen, and that's what could accelerate it. Commodity price increases, but also then food inflation, which will impact the overall inflation, and is consistent to what the IMF is saying.
Yes, and of course, so we'll separate that out because, of course, we were talking about the food, and you've moved on to talk about what we would be very worried about too: farm supplies not getting through, oil, natural gas, fertilizers, and of course that means for planting in the future. So let's look at the impact of that and what that could ultimately mean if a deal isn't reached soon.
So essentially, what it means is that the decisions are the following: I can plant the same with less inputs that will have an impact over my yields. The second possible decision is I can shift to crops which can capture more nitrogen, because the major problem is urea, which has nitrogen fertilizer. And that will mean that I will move from corn and wheat towards soybeans. And the third is how much I will allocate to biofuels if the oil prices crosses again the $100 limit. All those decisions will restrict the food supply for the next half of the year and the following year. And that's when you have less supply and you have the same demand, of course, the price will go up. And that is what commodity prices will result. And that's why I'm saying increasing commodity prices, which is wheat and corn, will end in an increase also on the food that you eat in the stores, which is bread, for example. So bread, 10 to 15% is wheat. The rest is energy, which is increasing, and labor force. So food will increase even at higher levels, and that will end in higher food inflation, which will affect, of course, the most vulnerable consumers.
And if a deal can't be reached before the ceasefire ends early next week, how critical is it that the US extends the truce until a compromise deal can be made?
Look, it's extremely critical because markets can react very fast. But the important thing is not only that there is no conflict in the Strait of Hormuz. The important thing is that vessels move from the Strait of Hormuz. Just to put in context, the last vessel that left the Strait of Hormuz arrived at the end of March. So right now we are going to start seeing the scarcity of those inputs. So if vessels don't move, then the solution is not there. If vessels start to move, let's assume tomorrow, then our expectation is that in 3 to 4 months, we will recover and markets will absorb. And of course, we will never be at the same situation as before because there is some infrastructure damage that will take more than a year to be fixed. But at least we will be closer to a solution that could allow us to avoid a food crisis in the second half of the year and the following year.
And if they do come up with a deal within the next few days, I mean, there's certainly, they seem to be cautiously optimistic of the possibility of that. Would you then be relieved and feel that there wouldn't be so much of a problem when it comes to once these ships get through the Strait of Hormuz and supplies eventually get to their destinations around the globe?
So look, damage is already done because infrastructure is damaged, and that takes more than a year. But if they come to a deal in the next days, then of course we are in the window of 0 to 90 days. That is a critical window. And that will imply that in 3 to 4 months, markets could absorb most of the damage and distribution of fertilizers will move forward. That could calm the situation and avoid a potential food crisis. But of course, prices will go up a little bit, but not as they will if the deal is not there. Also, it's important to understand that the pipeline that we have of vessels is important. Therefore, the countries which need the fertilizer earlier because of the crop calendar will have to pay more for those inputs to go faster to them. And that's the challenge that international financial organizations have to help by creating facilities or balance of payments that will allow them to facilitate those countries to accelerate the cheapness towards them. So there will be a period of 3 to 4 months of higher prices, but then things should be settled. Our market should be absorbed, not to the initial situation, but at least as close as to. But for sure, we will be avoiding moving to a situation like the one we had in COVID-19 of an economic growth decrease of minus 1.7%. Essentially, if we don't resolve this quickly, we could end in stagflation, no? Higher prices for food, higher prices overall inflation, and lower economic growth.
And of course, the whole world is hoping that a deal can be reached soon. Maximo Torero, thank you so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
A pleasure. Thank you.